Usually when you look at the foundation of an entire field of study, there is an expectation of, like, a paper trail.
Right. Yeah. You expect some documentation.
Exactly. Take architecture, for example. You look at a massive towering skyscraper, and you just know there are thousands of blueprints sitting in a municipal archive somewhere, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Proving exactly how that structure was built, line by line, beam by beam. But then you step into the world of Western philosophy, and those blueprints just, well, they vanish into thin air.
They really do. It's practically a historical blank spot.
It's wild. We're looking at the very baseline for how we analyze the world. The man considered the founding father of Western thought, and he never wrote down a single word.
Not one. Scholars actually refer to this as the Socratic problem.
Right.
Because everything we know about Socrates, literally every single detail of his life, his teachings, his trial, his execution, it all comes to us through this massive game of ancient telephone.
We are entirely reliant on other people.
Exactly. We only have the accounts of his contemporaries.
So we are essentially trying to understand a man entirely through the lenses of other people.
Which is notoriously unreliable.
Right. I mean, it feels like trying to reconstruct the true personality of a modern celebrity purely by reading, their friends' glowing Instagram posts.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Mixed together with their enemy's most vicious Reddit threads.
Yeah, that is exactly what it's like. Because on one hand, you have his devoted students like Plato and Xenophon.
Who practically worship the ground he walked on.
Exactly. They painted him as this flawless, untouchable sage. But then on the other hand, you have his critics.
Like the comic playwright Aristophanes.
Right. Who wrote these massive hit plays portraying Socrates as this dangerous, head-in-the-clouds lunatic.
So if his students idolized him, and his enemies literally wrote comedies making fun of him, how do we even begin to figure out what is actually real?
Well, the historical reality is buried deep within that tension. To find the actual human being, we have to look at where those conflicting accounts intersect.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because beneath the pristine white marble statue version of Socrates that we've, constructed over the centuries, there was a real man walking the streets of Athens around 470 BC.
And he was not exactly a marble statue.
No, he was abrasive, ugly, barefoot, undeniably annoying, and at the same time, profoundly brilliant.
The ultimate contradiction.
Right. And to understand why people wrote so obsessively about him, why they were driven to either love him fiercely or execute him, we really have to first understand the striking physical and personal reality of how he moved through the world.
Well, let's start with his origins because they immediately clash with this idea of an elite ivory tower philosopher.
Completely.
I mean, he was born in the Athenian deme of Alcibiades to a stoneworker and a midwife.
Definitely not a royal bloodline.
Not at all. However, he did inherit enough money from his father's estate to secure a life reasonably free of, financial panic.
Right. He wasn't extravagantly wealthy.
Yeah, but he didn't have to work a grueling manual labor job every day just to survive either.
And that inheritance gave him what might be the most dangerous luxury a brilliant mind can have: unbound time.
Ooh, I like that. Unbound time.
Yeah, and how he chose to spend that time and how he physically presented himself while doing it was deeply unsettling to his fellow citizens.
Because of the culture at the time, right?
Exactly. In ancient Athens, there was this cultural ideal known as kolokagathia.
Kolokagathia.
Right, which essentially meant that physical beauty and moral goodness were intrinsically linked. If you were beautiful on the outside, you were virtuous on the inside.
Wow.
And Socrates completely shattered that assumption.
Because the sources are pretty brutal about his appearance.
Oh, they don't hold back.
They describe him as notoriously ugly. He had a flat, turned-up nose, bulging eyes, a large belly. But it wasn't just genetics, it was his deliberate choices.
The lifestyle choices.
Yeah, he rarely bathed. He walked barefoot everywhere, even in the dead of winter.
Which is wild.
And he wore the exact same ragged, unwashed coat year-round. He was essentially wandering the wealthiest, most powerful city in the world, looking completely unkempt.
And yet, despite living this dirty, ascetic lifestyle, he was an absolute magnet for the youth of Athens.
That's the part that's so fascinating.
The wealthy, elite, beautiful young men of the city flocked to him. And there's a profound contradiction here that we have to address, because he wasn't just a wandering eccentric who disconnected from society.
Right.
He was an active citizen who fulfilled his civic duties. And in Athens, that included intense military service.
Right. During the brutal Peloponnesian War, He served as a hoplite.
A heavily armed foot soldier, yeah.
And he actually proved himself to be a decorated war hero. The accounts of him at the Battle of Potidæa are staggering.
They really are.
You picture this barefoot, unwashed philosopher in the middle of a massive, bloody clash of armies, and he actually saved the life of Alcibiades.
Which is a huge deal.
For context, for you listening, Alcibiades was a famous, incredibly powerful and beautiful general and politician, like the golden boy of Athens.
The ultimate Athenian elite.
And Socrates stood over his wounded body and fought off the enemy to save him.
And that military record cemented a certain undeniable respect for him. I mean, you have a man who proves his ultimate bravery in visceral hand-to-hand combat, standing shoulder to shoulder with his fellow citizens, who then returns home and chooses to live in intentional poverty, wandering the public square and questioning the very foundations of the society he just bled for.
Okay, I have to push back a little on the nature of his entourage, though.
Sure.
Was his appeal to these rich kids purely intellectual?
Yeah.
Because I look at this dynamic and I kind of wonder if he was essentially an ancient counterculture icon.
Like a rebel figure.
Yeah, were the wealthy youth of Athens hanging out with this unwashed barefoot guy simply to rebel against their aristocratic parents? It feels very similar to teenagers in the 1960s clinging to a bohemian lifestyle to shock their families.
Well, a portion of his appeal was undoubtedly the sheer spectacle. I mean, he was publicly flouting the rules of Athenian high society, which prioritized wealth, physical beauty, political status.
Right.
Hanging around a guy who actively mocked those things was certainly a form of rebellion. But the sources, particularly Plato, insist his primary draw was genuinely his intellect.
Really?
Yeah, he resisted their physical advances and focused entirely on educating their souls. But the specific mechanism of how he educated them was the real disruption.
Oh, absolutely.
It was a method so potent it literally spawned a new literary genre.
We are, of course, talking about the famous Socratic method, or the elitesHis.
It's the method of refutation.
Let's break down how this actually functioned in the streets of Athens. Because he wouldn't just lecture people, right?
No, never a straight lecture.
Instead, he would find someone who was widely considered an expert on a specific topic. Let's say a famous general talking about courage, or a politician talking about justice. Socrates would walk up to them in the middle of the crowded marketplace and just ask them to define that concept.
And he would start with extreme humility, too, like asking for a simple definition. And when the expert provided one, Socrates would begin asking a series of seemingly innocent follow-up questions.
Just tiny little questions.
Right. He would test their definition against different scenarios, and with every answer, the so-called expert would back themselves further into a logical corner.
Until
Eventually completely contradicting the definition they gave just 5 minutes earlier.
reading through the surviving dialogues, this process sounds exactly like a toddler constantly asking why until an exhausted parent has a complete meltdown.
That is a perfect analogy.
You know what I mean? Why is the sky blue? Because of light. Why light? Because of the sun. Why the sun? And eventually the parent just screams, I don't know.
Exactly.
The difference is that Socrates was doing this to powerful politicians, revered poets, wealthy merchants.
And he was doing it with an audience.
Right. An audience of giggling teenagers watching these powerful men humiliate themselves.
The ultimate conclusion of the elitesHis was almost always a public demonstration of the supposed expert's ignorance. And this raises a massive question regarding his motives, which is a point where modern scholars are sharply divided.
Oh, the two camps.
Yeah, we usually categorize this debate into the non-constructivist view and the constructivist view.
Let's define those for a second, because the distinction really matters.
Sure.
The non-constructivists argue that this was basically just sophisticated trolling, right? That he merely wanted to establish inconsistency, tear down his opponents, and prove people wrong just for the sake of it.
Correct. The non-constructivist theory suggests his goal was purely negative, to destroy false confidence.
Okay.
But the constructivist view argues that by clearing away the rubble of false knowledge and flawed assumptions, he was genuinely trying to build a foundation for affirmative, objective truths.
Like tearing down a bad house to build a good one.
Exactly. He believed you couldn't learn what justice actually is until you first realized that your current definition of justice is garbage.
Which leads directly to his most famous philosophical stance, Socratic ignorance.
The famous quote,
I know that I know nothing.
Right. He genuinely believed that acknowledging one's lack of knowledge is the absolute prerequisite for wisdom.
Yeah.
And he weaponized this through what we now call Socratic irony.
How did that work?
Well, he would playfully feign modesty, flattering his opponents. He'd say things like, "Oh, you are so wise, and I am so ignorant. Please teach me your ways."
Oh, that's so manipulative.
It was bait. He used this flattery as bait to lure them into a public debate where he would systematically dismantle their entire worldview.
It is a brilliant rhetorical strategy, but you can instantly see how it would generate a massive amount of resentment.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, he was making powerful men look like fools in front of their future voters.
Yeah, that doesn't usually go over well.
No. And it wasn't just his frustrating logic that made people uncomfortable, right? It was his relationship with the divine.
Yes, his religious views were very controversial.
He had a deeply strange, highly personal religious belief regarding something he called his daemonion.
His divine inner voice.
What makes his inner voice so fascinating to me is its mechanism. This voice never told him what to do.
Never.
It only ever spoke up to warn him against making a mistake or taking a wrong action. It was a purely negative divine intervention, like a spiritual stop sign.
And to understand why that was so inflammatory, you really have to understand ancient Athenian religion.
Right.
Religion wasn't just a personal, private belief system back then. It was the glue of the state.
It was everything.
It was highly organized around public domestic rituals, citywide festivals, and communal sacrifices to the pantheon of gods. The gods were viewed as transactional.
You do something for them, they do something for you.
Exactly. You sacrifice a bull to Poseidon so your trading ships don't sink.
And Socrates completely rejected that transactional view.
Completely.
In dialogues like the Euthyphro, he effectively argues that sacrificing to the gods in hopes of bribing them for a reward is absurd.
Right.
He claimed the gods were inherently wise and just, which completely contradicted the traditional Greek mythology that portrayed gods as, petty, jealous, and vengeful.
He was flipping the whole system on its head.
He believed that the true way to worship the divine was through the pursuit of philosophy and knowledge.
He was rationalizing religion. And worse, he was personalizing it, claiming you have a private, divine voice in your head, bypass the state-sanctioned oracles and priests.
Which is dangerous.
Extremely. In a society that relies on traditional communal religion for its social cohesion, privatizing your connection to the gods is viewed as deeply subversive.
And you can only rationalize the gods and humiliate the political elite for so long before they retaliate.
The clock was ticking.
The city of Athens was eventually going to strike back. And in 399 BC, the breaking point arrived with the trial of the gadfly. But to understand why he was dragged into court, we can't just look at his annoying behavior.
No.
We have to look at the immense political trauma Athens had just survived.
The context here is absolutely vital. Athens was a bleeding, traumatized city. They had just lost the Peloponnesian War, which was a grueling 27-year conflict with Sparta.
Just devastating.
And when Sparta finally crushed Athens in 404 BC, they dismantled the Athenian democracy. In its place, the Spartans installed a brutal, pro-oligarchic puppet government that history remembers as the 30 Tyrants.
And this wasn't just a bureaucratic change in leadership.
No.
The 30 Tyrants were a murderous regime. They executed roughly 5% of the Athenian population in less than a year.
It was a bloodbath.
They confiscated property, exiled political rivals, turned the city into a slaughterhouse. And the absolute kicker here is the leader of those tyrants.
This is the key connection.
His name was Critias, and he was one of Socrates' most famous, high-profile students.
This is the causal link that really doomed Socrates. For decades, Socrates had openly criticized the democratic system. He taught that governing a state required absolute expertise, not a popularity contest.
Right.
He mocked the idea that a majority vote by uneducated tradesmen could determine the best course of action for a city.
So his wealthy elite students, guys like Critias, listened to Socrates say, only experts should rule. And they look in the mirror and think, well, I am an educated aristocrat.
I must be the expert.
Therefore, I should rule, even if I have to use violence to do it. To the average Athenian citizen whose family members were murdered by the tyrants, Socrates wasn't just an eccentric philosopher.
No, he was the ideological architect of their suffering.
Exactly. His teachings were viewed as the intellectual poison that created monsters like Critias.
So eventually, a coalition of democratic rebels overthrew the 30 tyrants and restored the democracy. But to prevent an endless cycle of civil war and revenge killings, the restored government instituted a general amnesty in 403 BC.
Okay, an amnesty.
Yeah, this amnesty meant that you legally could not prosecute anyone for political crimes committed during the reign of the tyrants.
So if you are an Athenian citizen who wants to get rid of Socrates because you blame him for the tyrants, but you legally can't charge him with treason because of the amnesty.
You have to find a loophole.
You find a loophole.
And they did. You attack him on religious and moral grounds. The official charges were brought forward by 3 accusers, Miletus, elitesHis, and Lycon.
And what were the charges?
They charged him with aspeia, which means impiety, or failing to acknowledge the gods recognized by the state and introducing new deities, and with corrupting the youth of Athens.
Corrupting the youth, of course.
They also deliberately lumped him in with the sophists.
Let's define what a sophist was, because it was basically a dirty word in Athens at the time.
Very much so.
Sophists were professional, highly paid teachers of rhetoric. They traveled around teaching wealthy young men how to win arguments, regardless of whether they were right or wrong.
It was all about the win.
Right. They taught how to make the weaker argument defeat the stronger one, essentially training the next generation of slick, manipulative politicians.
And Socrates despised the sophists because they didn't care about the objective truth.
Right.
Only about winning. Yet, his accusers painted him as the ultimate sophist. So, the trial convenes, featuring a jury of 500 male Athenian citizens.
I look at the accounts of this trial, and I'm just stunned by his behavior.
It's unbelievable.
He's facing a jury of 500 angry, traumatized men holding his life in their hands, and he doesn't grovel.
Nope.
He doesn't parade his weeping family in front of the jury, which was the standard practice to gain sympathy. If anything, he doubles down. Why would he deliberately antagonize the very people who were deciding his fate?
Because for Socrates, compromising his principles to save his physical body would be the ultimate defeat. His defense, which is recorded brilliantly in Plato's Apology, is entirely uncompromising. He systematically points out the logical contradictions in the charges brought by Miletus.
He elenchus his own trial.
He really did. But then, rather than asking for mercy, he elevates his role. He claims that he is actually a gift bestowed upon Athens by the gods.
A literal gift.
Right. He compares himself to a gadfly.
Like a horsefly.
Exactly. A horsefly that bites a large, lazy horse to keep it awake. He tells the jury that his constant questioning, his annoying interrogations, are the only things keeping the city morally alert.
I can't imagine calling a jury a lazy horse went over well.
It did not. The jury, predictably, is not charmed, and they vote to find him guilty by a narrow margin. Now, the way Athenian sentencing worked is fascinating.
Yeah, explain this.
The prosecution proposes a penalty, in this case, death, and the defendant is required to propose a counterpenalty. The jury then picks between the two.
This is perhaps the most defining, audacious moment of his entire life.
Without a doubt.
When it is his turn to propose his own punishment, he tells the jury that considering the immense service he has provided to the city by educating their souls, his punishment should be free meals for the rest of his life in the Prytaneum.
It's just an unbelievable level of confidence.
For those listening, the Prytaneum was the central hearth of the city. Being given free meals, there was an honor exclusively reserved for victorious Olympic champions and great military heroes.
Right.
He is essentially asking for a Lifetime Achievement Award at his own death penalty trial.
He really is. He eventually relents under pressure from his friends and offers a small financial fine, but the damage is done.
Oh, the jury must have been furious.
He forces their hand. By refusing to propose a serious penalty like exile, he leaves them no choice. To propose a genuine punishment would be to admit guilt, and to admit guilt would be to betray his life's work.
Truth was absolute to him.
Exactly. Bending to the will of an irrational, emotional crowd would destroy everything he stood for.
And the jury is deeply insulted. Actually, more jurors voted for the death penalty than voted to find him guilty in the first place.
That's the craziest part.
Meaning, some people who thought he was innocent were so angered by his arrogance that they decided to execute him anyway.
Yeah, they were just done with him.
So he is ordered to drink poison hemlock.
And the final days leading up to his execution solidify his legacy forever. He is held in a prison cell awaiting the poison.
And he had wealthy friends, right? Like Crito.
Oh, absolutely.
Crito came to him with a foolproof plan. They had bribed the guards. They had an escape route ready. He could have simply walked out of the cell, traveled to another city, and lived out his remaining years teaching elsewhere.
But he refuses to leave.
Why?
In the dialogue, Crito, he lays out one of the earliest formulations of the social contract. He argues that he has lived his entire life enjoying the benefits, the protections, and the culture of Athenian law.
Right.
To break that law now simply because it is fatally inconvenient to him would destroy the moral foundation of society.
That is heavy.
You cannot preach about justice your entire life and then act unjustly to save your own skin. To flee would be to prove his enemies right.
So he stays.
He stays.
Surrounded by his weeping friends, he calmly drinks the hemlock. As the paralysis creeps up his legs and reaches his heart, he speaks his final, heavily debated words.
Which are so mysterious.
Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Don't forget to pay the debt.
Asclepius was the Greek god of healing and medicine.
Right.
When you recovered from a severe illness, you sacrificed a rooster to him in gratitude.
The implication there is breathtaking. He is thanking the god of healing for curing him of the disease of physical life.
Exactly.
He views death not as a tragedy, but as a release. A cure that frees his soul from the messy, irrational demands of the mortal coil.
He believed deeply in the immortality of the soul. He saw death as a transition to a realm where he could continue his pursuit of pure, unadulterated knowledge, free from hunger, pain, and the ignorance of the Athenian mob.
And his death acted as a catalyst that caused his influence to explode across the ancient world. But because he never wrote down a definitive doctrine, his legacy completely fractured.
Fractured into a million pieces.
Every philosophical school that came after him looked at his life, grabbed the one specific piece they liked, and claimed him as their own.
The interpretations went in wildly different directions. You had the cynics, like Diogenes, who looked at Socrates and decided his poverty was the entire point.
Oh,
They copied his barefoot, anti-materialist minimalism, rejecting all societal norms.
right.
Then you had his student Plato, who took the dialectic method of questioning and used it to build massive, highly structured metaphysical systems.
And then the Stoics, right.
Yeah, later the Stoics adopted his core idea that inner virtue is the only true good, regardless of external circumstances.
And jumping forward into the modern era, the reactions to him are just as extreme and polarizing.
Very much so.
Søren Kierkegaard, the father of existentialism, practically idolized him. He wrote his master's thesis on Socratic irony, viewing Socrates as the ultimate master of forcing individuals to confront what they didn't know.
Then you have 20th century political theorists like Hannah Arendt.
What did she think of him?
Well, writing in the aftermath of World War II and the horrors of the Holocaust, she looked back at Socrates and saw the ultimate psychological defense against totalitarianism.
Really?
How so?
She argued that his habit of constant self-reflection, that internal dialogue where you question your own motives and the authority around you, is the only thing that prevents the banality of evil. A person who is constantly thinking and questioning cannot be programmed to mindlessly follow a tyrant.
Wow. But he also had fierce critics, right? Friedrich Nietzsche absolutely loathed him.
Oh, Nietzsche's critique in The Birth of Tragedy is ruthless. He blamed Socrates for the psychological deterioration of ancient Greek civilization.
That's a huge claim. It is. Nietzsche categorized human nature into two drives. The Apollonian drive for order and reason, and the Dionysian drive for passion, chaos, and instinct.
Okay.
Nietzsche argued that by equating pure reason with virtue, Socrates killed off the raw, beautiful, instinctual aspects of humanity. For Nietzsche, Socrates was a tyrannical rationalist who suppressed the tragic intuition of the pre-Socratic world.
It's completely mind-blowing to think that one guy walking around a city in a dirty coat sparked centuries of intense debate between some of the greatest minds in human history.
It really is.
But there is a historical irony here that we have to acknowledge. Today, if you ask someone about Socrates, he is universally celebrated as the ultimate martyr for democracy.
Oh, yeah.
The noble guy who died defending free speech against the mob.
That is the incredibly romanticized, sanitized version of the story we like to tell ourselves.
Right, but if you look at the actual sources, he despised the democratic mechanism.
We really did.
He made it crystal clear that he thought the general public was too easily manipulated by rhetoric and emotional tricks to be trusted with state power. He thought politicians in a democracy were just pandering to the masses, telling the crowd what they wanted to hear instead of doing what was objectively morally right.
He lived his entire life exercising the very freedom of speech that an open democracy protects, yet he fundamentally distrusted the mechanics of democracy itself. He believed in individual moral autonomy over the collective, unexamined opinion of the crowd.
So, distilling all of this, the barefoot marches, the endless questions in the marketplace, the trauma of the war, the trial, the hemlock, we are left with his core intellectual motive.
Which is perfectly encapsulated in that one famous phrase.
The unexamined life is not worth living.
That is the enduring takeaway. His story proves that wisdom doesn't begin with accumulating a massive inventory of facts. It begins with the humility to admit what you don't know. True wisdom is like a muscle. It only grows stronger when your comfortable assumptions are forcefully torn down. It requires the courage to question the deeply held norms of the society around you, and more importantly, the assumptions you hold about yourself.
It leaves me with a final provocative thought for you to mull over. We revere him as a pristine marble statue today. But if Socrates miraculously appeared right now in our modern world, where would he fit?
That is the big question.
Would he be a highly respected, tenured university professor, warmly invited to speak on panel discussions? Or would he be an unhoused guy with a podcast, arguing with people on the street, relentlessly exposing the hypocrisies of modern society?
Honestly, probably the latter.
Right. And inevitably getting utterly canceled by both ends of the political spectrum for daring to ask the wrong questions.
When you strip away the polished myth and look closely at the messy, brilliant reality of the man, you realize that the diagnostic landscape of human nature hasn't changed. The crowd's reaction to uncomfortable truths is just as murky and dangerous now as it was then.
We owe it to ourselves to keep asking those uncomfortable questions. We'll see you on the next deep dive.